and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. So what do Malaysian teens want to be when they grow up? Behavioral data from 300,000 upper secondary school students reveals that young Malaysians overwhelmingly gravitate towards a small set of conventional jobs. Now, it's a safe choice, but does it match the skills that our economy will need in the coming decades? Well, joining me on the show to discuss this further, I have Maha Subramaniam, who is Vice President of Creador Foundation and head of its non-profit Schola. And I also have Kularetnam Vijayakumar, CEO of Yayasan Tunku Abdul Rahman. Both of you, welcome to the show. I understand that you've worked together on certain initiatives, so I'm happy to have both of you come talk to us a little bit about what young Malaysians are thinking about in terms of their career decisions. Maha, talk to us first about Schola, which is a free online career planning tool. So some of the data that you have revealed some fascinating insights into how young Malaysians are making these career decisions. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. So actually today marks our 1 year since going live with the platform, the Schola platform. Thank you. And so before we launched the website itself, we had like a pre-survey with 1,000 students first, just to understand, you know, actually currently what's their state of thinking about the career. So out of 1,000 students, we realized that 40% of the students named one of these 4 jobs. It's either doctor, lawyer, business person, or a teacher, right? And then when we asked about, okay, fine, you know, it's not for us to say right or wrong, but when we asked about, hey, can you explain a bit more about the jobs or pathways to get there? Almost 80% of them had sort of no idea. They couldn't really verbalize the steps and further insights into it. So that was sort of the baseline of, for most students, that they really knew just some sets of jobs. And then we started with that. So our hypothesis of Schola in the very, very initial days was, hey, students don't know different jobs out there. We show them, you know, like a diverse array of careers, and they would then consider that. So then fast forward to all this data that we have, then we realized a very now new interesting pattern. So we first went live with like this career quiz. So, you know, our issue was, career planning sounds so boring, right? Like how do we make people care about career planning? So the quiz was more of a hook to draw students into, hey, like this is fun, you know, let's plan it. So then we realized actually that wasn't a problem, since we got a lot of volume of students wanting to do the quiz, and then they were then matched to a list of jobs lah. So we on the platform have like 150 jobs, like really diverse jobs, from more hands-on jobs to STEM jobs, to really diverse. But then now the new problem was students were getting these matches, really diverse matches to their personalities, but we would see that they would literally scroll all the way until job number, say 30, 40, until they saw that teacher or that lawyer or that doctor, and then they would click on it. So then we realized, okay, we sort of solved for a hook in terms of getting them to care or be curious. But the next step was, but they're still only clicking on familiar jobs. So the whole constraint of familiarity was like such a big issue. And then very quickly after that, we realized, okay, now we have to add on new things to pivot. So how do we give students this like safety of, you can explore, it's not that big of an issue to explore unfamiliar jobs. So we realized that asking students who you are and matching to jobs and asking them to explore different jobs felt so core to their identity that was scary. Then students actually, they think about jobs from the context of, the closest was, oh, I like these subjects. So we very quickly deployed like this subject to job tool. And it was so fascinating because it's such a simple tweak of framing. So instead of saying, this is who you are and these are jobs you can explore, this new tool was, you tell us what subject you like, and then we will tell you what jobs are matched to this subject. Then the shift in students exploring newer jobs just really improved by so much. So this tweaks and framing was just very fascinating for us to do. And obviously for us, it was like a trial and error thing.
So that's wonderful. It tells me a few things, that students are really hungry for this type of guidance. They're looking for maybe ways to learn about different things that are outside of what they already, you talked about familiarity, right? Kula, was this something that you also observed as part of your work with Yayasan?
Yes, definitely. So something that we saw over and over again with the students that we work with, especially through our Closing the Gap program where we work with high school students, is that familiarity is king, especially for students who are first generation degree students, meaning that parents did not go to university. So what are the careers they're familiar with? You know, you go to the doctor, you know, you've probably met a teacher, you've probably met a pharmacist, maybe you know an accountant, perhaps you've heard of a lawyer or you've watched a lawyer TV show. Something we've seen as well is sometimes a lot of students will tell us that they want to be criminologists because you know, they've seen CSI on
yeah,
TV.
yeah, really forensic scientists.
Yeah, forensic science. So familiarity in media plays a very big role.
Wow.
And that's why with our mentorship program, you know, we try to pair students with people from diverse pathways. So they get a sense and exposure of these different things. For example, we also run the Future Ready program, which is intended to expose people to careers like being a consultant or working in knowledge services. Because, you know, even for me, right, my parents had degrees, but if I told my parents I wanted to be a consultant, they'd probably be like, why?
What is that?
What is that? Because it's not a traditional career. It's not a career that everybody is aware of. So definitely, I think there's a very big role in providing exposure. But once that exposure is provided, we also need to provide encouragement so that the students feel comfortable and safe to pursue these careers.
Well, what do you think it tells us about the way society views what is success? I'm very curious to know. I mean, when you think about some of these conventional jobs that you talked about, these are what we traditionally think of. Okay, if I have this job, I will be considered successful by society. Does it tell you a story about how we talk about success in front of particularly young people?
Yep. I think for us, in terms of what society, like what this tells us about success is that it's actually across all age groups, we realize what's important or what's success for people oftentimes is either you earn a specific income or you know, you have certain lifestyle aspirations, and this is the one that we feel like actually it's across, you know, at an adult, at a young age, and when we ask someone what's important, that's that. But what is very interesting about then how that definition of success morphs into like how I'm going to achieve it is oftentimes for students it's just sort of pigeonhole, or like it becomes a binary, and we see students fall into two camps. So it's either I need to achieve this definition of success, which, you know, most people strive for, which is income or aspiration. So the first camp was conventional pathways, which means they default to these things. But oftentimes, when we then prod, it's really not because that they truly believe that's the only route to success. It's literally because they don't know other options out there.
Okay, so it's just a lack of information, is it? Okay.
And then the second camp of students is typically in the short-term camp. So it's more of my aspirations are income, but the time matters, like quick income. You know, that matters a lot. So that's sort of
Is that to do with kind of cost pressures or like daily pressures of making money, is it?
Yeah. So for us, like it's too right. We don't want to, like, we completely acknowledge that the pressures of for some students needing to fund their family and all is such a big thing. But initially it started with that, but now we are realizing across like a huge set of students, even students that don't have those upfront pressures of funding and all, also then fall into this earning quick, only because they just genuinely don't have an idea of long-termism and what an upside of thinking about careers in a long time frame means for them.
That's a good point. It also maybe, I wonder whether students who prefer maybe an upfront kind of steady income as opposed to aiming high for a higher income over the years speaks about the students' perception of social mobility, right? The ability to transcend maybe socioeconomic class.
You're absolutely right. I think as higher education becomes more and more popular, the economic promise of a degree becomes less strong, right? A degree is no longer a guarantee of a high-paying job. I think KRI came out with a paper back in 2022 where they said that 90% of graduates from low-income families were earning below 2,000 ringgit after a university degree. And if you compare, you know, if you get a job without a degree, you'd probably be earning around the same amount as well. So if the economic promise of a degree is no longer there, that's when you get people questioning, why should I do a degree in the first place? Why should I delay earning for 3-4 years when I could go straight into the workplace and earn the same amount? So there is really a need to make sure that students are equipped for the workplace and to make sure that they have jobs available for them that provide commensurate wages. Because, for example, what we see, and this is something that our Human Resources Minister said recently as well, which was that despite the focus on STEM, we don't have a STEM industry that can support that supply of STEM graduates.
Right.
And the result is what we can see. This is something that the Department of Statistics said last year. 70% of students or people between the ages 15 to 24 are underemployed, meaning they're in jobs that do not require a degree.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you talk, Maha, you mentioned that some of these young people, they just don't know. They don't know the pathway. They're not familiar with the diversity in of career options. Why is that? Are our schools not giving them enough information to explore the full range of career options?
Yeah. So, I mean, schools have a really tough job, right? In the sense of their mandate now involves, you know, foundational numeracy, literacy,
so many things,
and then
right? They have to do
curriculum, all of these things. But I think what we have realized, and obviously then now this added pressure of being more involved in students' lives after, you know, prepping them for it. But I think for us is what has been encouraging, you know, with Schola, we have about now 9,000 teachers and counselors who use it. So it's actually, through all our interactions, it's not for the lack of like willingness to participate in it, but it's just that how do they even go about it, right? So I think the good starting point is everyone is really bought in. They do agree that, hey, this is important, and they're like super bought in. I think the second part to it is there's two critical things that needs to happen at a school juncture. First is someone that tells students like, hey, you have to think about careers now, right? And then the second part is, given that you think about it, right, these are all the very specific information about careers that you need to know. That second part is honestly quite impossible for a teacher or a school system to do because it's just so...
Could you give me an example of what kind of information?
So, for example, if, you know, you are dealing, as a teacher, I would deal with hundreds, if not thousands of students. And if I am interested in, say, a data analyst job, and another student of mine is interested in a clinical lab technician, to have that breadth of knowledge and like not just know that job exists, but being able to say, hey, I think this is this pathway and all, it's just really tough. So how we see it is, if the school systems can really partner on the first part, which is that entry point of getting students to think about, hey, please think about careers now, it's really important. We think of industry partners, ourselves, NGOs, everyone as complementary to that, not to replace school-based guidance, but complementary to then equip them with, you know, tools and resources to do the next step, like the last mile. Here are more specific information, you know, that you can use to nudge them. You know?
When you give them the kind of range of career options, are you thinking about what kind of jobs we will need in the future as well?
Yeah. So we currently, we have different ways of doing it. So in terms of just the directory itself, that we have a few things, like STEM jobs, we have it. But what we are realizing is current students' appetite is when there's STEM, there is the highest click jobs are still doctor, pharmacist, you know, chemist, and also in terms of STEM, only science is S equals to STEM for most students.
Okay.
So how do we...
They don't think about the TEM.
Yes. Yeah. So, and we have all of those jobs. And so currently we're trying to ensure that we nudge students towards these pathways through different factors, right? Under giving them a fuller picture of, hey, think about demand factors, think about salary progression and growth factors, so that and honestly, when people, students, when we realize they are aware and they can comprehend this, then they're like, okay, fine, I will explore the TEM, basically, yeah.
I would note that when it comes to employment, I don't think schools have the primary role here. I think it's important to note that we as a society, we need to be prioritizing young people and their ability to transition into meaningful employment. If you look at the national education philosophy, all right, it doesn't say that, oh, the job of a school is to prepare a student for work. The purpose of education is to prepare someone for life, not to make a living, right? And even if you look at our national education philosophy, it says it's a continuous effort to develop students holistically and equally across multiple frameworks. Because truthfully, right, if we just focus on career prep or you know, learning certain skills or learning to use certain tools, we're at real risk of, you know, developing a society of people who are technically skilled but morally void. You know, Martin Luther King said this too. He said, you know, we live in a society of guided missiles and misguided men. And that's a society, he said that 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
So relevant today.
Still relevant today, yes. So I feel that schools exist to provide that baseline guidance. And of course, more can be done in terms of exposure. But I also wonder, what is being done elsewhere in society, right? Are there opportunities for paid internships that are accessible to everybody? Is there career exposure? Is there more connection between industry and schools?
Right, that's interesting. Do you think that young people are genuinely choosing some of these careers, or are they mostly following the paths of the adults around them? I wonder whether it's not the young people who we need to give information, to equip with information. Maybe it's the parents that need to also be educated about the diverse range of career.
Definitely.
Yeah. So are they listening to their parents, or are they making their own up?
They are definitely listening to their parents. So like if we see like about half students, when we say, okay, why this pathway? It's usually, oh, my family or parents and all. But I think we do acknowledge for parents, it's not like it's do this or not, but they can be convinced, and it's purely like for all of the circle of influence, everyone doesn't have enough information, right? So it's really just that. And we've spoken to some parents and all as well. It is scary to tell your child to pursue something that you also have no idea what it is. So like for me as well, this idea of Schola is actually very, very personal. Like my dad was a rubber tapper, and then he was a technician in TNB. Then me, I got a scholarship, so I sort of went and realized that there are all these other jobs there. But I remember when I was telling my dad I was going to pursue, something like this, like to start this, for someone who worked in a power station for 40 years, and I was at that point like already mid-20s, can make my own, and they were just like, no, very resistant, because it's scary. Like, what does that mean? Like, not a single person in our entire family has done anything. So I think it's not that parents cannot be convinced. So for us, what we try to do to minimize, just from a website perspective, we ensure that every job guide is we attach real career professionals working in there. So there are voices of it and that really does give parents assurance. That's something that we've seen, that when we see this person from this company said this, they're like, oh, okay, then, just so building on that as well.
That's actually something I really appreciated about what Schola did. So, when I went for their launch, they brought in professionals from across different sectors, and it was an opportunity for students and their parents both to have these kinds of conversations. And I think when we talk about taking a whole of society approach, that's the kind of thing we want to see, right? Like, how can both parents and children be able to speak to people in different industries and have a sense of different careers? Because I also think it's a bit unfair for you to expect like a 17, 18-year-old to convince their parents like, yes, I should be studying AI. I'm sure if I tried that with someone my age too, I don't think it would work out necessarily.
I mean, representation is so important. When you see a kind of living, breathing person represent this field, it's so much easier to want to follow in their footsteps. I saw someone reading the news when I was 12 and thought, oh, that sounds like an interesting job. Maybe I should do that too. And that became my kind of career pathway, my dream. So I should also probably ask you whether you noticed any gender differences in the data. Were boys and girls making different career options?
Yeah. So currently we don't have as big of a subset to say, but there are differences. So very traditionally, the boys tend to click on slightly more engineering jobs, more technician, hands-on jobs. For women, it was more dominating, like doctors, so some slightly more caregiving, nurturing, like, in terms of being a teacher and all of that. But as across both, it's still very traditional jobs dominating both. So,
so it wasn't so much about that gender difference, but more about the familiarity of it.
I can share that what we see, especially because we run a scholarship as well, right? We see that when it comes to university selection and scholarships as well, women, girls, are a bit more limited by this expectation that they take on caregiving, not just of their parents, but also of their siblings. And so, for example, we hear students say things like, oh, I wouldn't want to go to university away from home. I wouldn't want to get a job away from home because I need to take care of my parents. I need to take care of my younger siblings. And this is something that we see constraining a lot of women who are pursuing higher education and entering the workforce as well, which I think also points to a need to how do we think about not just childcare, but also, care for parents soon to be aging out.
Yeah, definitely. It already so young, they're thinking about these things, right? The caregiving
17.
responsibility kicks in really young. Something you said a bit earlier really struck me, Kula. You talked about how schools their primary responsibility is not to prepare for work, but prepare for life. And I do want to talk a little bit about that, because I wonder whether there is that guidance. And what I like about Yayasan is that the guidance is beyond just kind of financial guidance, right? There is some mentorship involved, some kind of leadership coaching involved. how are we preparing our young students to transition from school, the highly structured school environment, into the more kind of self-directed world of university, world of work? How are we preparing them for life, do you think?
I think there's perhaps some level of contradiction here in that we're seeing some really positive efforts, I think, because something that we used to see or probably experience ourselves, right, was that there's a big gap in how things are run in school and how things are run in university. But since then, you know, especially with new curriculums, the Ministry of Education now, they get students to run projects that are similar to university projects, you know. Like they have to interview people, they have to go to museums.
At school, at the school level.
Yeah.
So I used to be a history teacher and I had to send my students to museums so that they could write papers. And I was like, this is kind of like what I had to do back in university. So we're seeing some positive efforts there.
Okay.
But at the same time, if you look at something like a high-stakes exam like SPM, we've made a lot of progress here in that, you know, we've gotten rid of UPSR, we've gotten rid of PT3, but there's still this feeling, and we see this a lot in the students that we work with, that SPM is the be-all, end-all. You know, this is the determinant of your future. So when we ask students, you know, what do you plan to work as? What do you plan to do, you know, after you finish secondary school? They will usually tell us, I don't want to think about this until after SPM.
Oh, that's very true.
So if you as a student, right, your entire time in secondary school, you're gearing up for SPM, I don't really expect you to think beyond that. So I think when we think about how do we support students more, we see the effort on the ground. We see teachers having these conversations with students. But systemically, I think we need to move away a bit more from high-stakes exams so that the students think a bit more beyond exams and think a bit more about their future beyond the exam results.
Okay. All right. And what kind of life readiness skills would you like them to be thinking about?
I think this is something that comes up a lot, right? I think perhaps you've also heard this. People say, how come school didn't teach me to do my taxes?
That's true.
But I don't think it is the purpose of a school to teach you to do your taxes, right? I mean, like taxes change every year.
Sure.
So I think ultimately, school should prepare you with the ability to learn. And this is a question that I asked my own AdMaths teacher. I really appreciate her patience with me. I was like, why do I have to learn AdMaths? You know, I have a calculator. Like, I don't need to learn this. But what I realized now was that it was trying to teach me logic and an ability to learn that I can see benefiting me in a lot of different ways. But I think just me as a student, I did not understand that philosophy back then. So I think school, that does exist, but I would like to see perhaps a bit more explicit mention of that philosophy, right? That school is to prepare you to learn so that whatever you need to learn across the rest of your life, you're ready.
Right. What about you, Maha?
So for me, so schools are really taking good steps in terms of financial literacy and all, but I would say I think the fundamental of Schola is this idea of belief, right? And for me, belief is actually a muscle that you train. It's not like, I don't mean it in like a blind optimism sort of way, right? And I really do think it's a skill set because how can we think about schools preparing students for belief as a skill, right? Because I really think belief underpins the idea of adaptability because you trial, you error, you fail, fine, you pivot, right? And I do think sometimes when I think about, you know, people ask, oh, how did that mobility or transition happen? I would say I was lucky in that I had a lot of sort of belief as a skill trained, and I really, really wish that that would be as integral to all of the school systems. And, you know, and with Schola, we try to do that as like, for us, it's not our role to say, don't do that or shut it down, because the real world is harsh as it is, and they will get plenty of that already. So how do you do that? But belief equals to a skill, so you have to practice it.
Wow. And start young
Yeah.
practicing that. Both of you, thank you so much for this. This is very interesting kind of conversations into how young people are thinking about this, and we're maybe changing the traditional outlook of what we think is a successful career ladder. Well, thank you both for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
That's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.